So quite simply, with life cycle costing, once you've done the upgrades, once you've done the look at it, you can simply say, and I made a very simple graph here to represent the cost of short life cycles versus long life cycles. And that time can be anything you like it to be. 40 years, and every 5 years you're doing some work, or every 10 years you're doing some work, and trying to restrict that amount of work you're doing. So it's very straightforward, very simple philosophy of making sure that the amount of money you spend now is spent well. It's spent efficiently and effectively to reduce the amount of money you're going to spend later. And unfortunately, it is one of those situations where we have two different budgets, two different departments, or even a different company who do the original investment in a new construction. And we're stuck with what's important for a new construction, sticking to budget, and keeping on time. They're the two main criteria for a budget, presumably also equipment that works afterwards. But when you have those as your main criteria, skipping on the last thing, which is usually paint, is the thing that everybody wants to do. They know the consequences, but they're walking away from those consequences. And it's the poor guys afterwards who get stuck with those OPEX increases. But OPEX is accepted because when you're producing, you have something to offset it against. When you're building, there's no offset. You have a cost, and the board of directors have approved that cost, and you have to live with it, no choice. So you're stuck with that one, unfortunately. So it's a big challenge, therefore, to increase it, to improve it. So I'm talking philosophy. I'm talking philosophy because I want people to think bigger. I want people to understand that money well spent up front is truly well spent. It's done in a way to improve the operation of the equipment. It's done in a way to improve and give you long life. And having that whole attitude is good. And this black art called paint and corrosion protection, and I call it an art, there is science there, but there's so much we don't understand about it, as we saw just now. There's much more to learn, that we have to think in a different way, in a bigger way. If you have an asset that's in good form, those investors, that board of directors, they're happy. And happy investors, that makes a good situation. Safety is becoming more and more important in our businesses. Safety is critical. If it's clean, it's corrosion-free, if it's operating properly, the risk of accidents is reduced dramatically. So you have a safer working environment. And even if you just want to take the financial aspect of that away, it's cheaper if you have a safer environment. It costs less, because accidents cost money as well as the personal effect. You can reduce the workload of everybody working in that operation, because corrosion, coating failures, all these sorts of things, they create a lot of extra hassle that is not programmed in a normal operation. It's additional. And that extra workload is a headache, because you already have enough work as it is. And finally, having a nice, good-looking, cosmetic workplace is good. Most of us, or many of us, have offices, right? And when those offices are new and fresh, you work with a different attitude. You behave differently. You work more efficiently. This is proven by many studies. So having safe and, shall we call it, attractive working environment, because it's been well coated, it's been well kept, makes us more efficient. All of these things add up to saving money for the operation. And saving money for the operation at just a small cost up front of improving the situation with better cleaning, better preparation, and a better coating system gives you profit. The trouble is, that calculation is a philosophy. It's hard to write it down on paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miles. I would like to open questions to from the floor, please. I'm sure you've stirred up enough trouble to get some questions.
I think things will happen later, maybe in the bar.
Any questions? Well, I'd like to open up with a question. How much have you found Jotun be quite international? You say the paint really depends on the on the environment, how much difference do you find that different countries would tend to prefer different paints?
Oh, it's tremendous, and I joked a little bit about it with zinc silicates when I come down here, because Australia has a reputation by European standard for paint people for loving zinc silicates. And there's a reason for that. I think they were, Ted, you'll have to correct me here, but they're invented here, at least the waterborne. And those types of technologies, it's very straightforward and simple. It's easy to calculate and understand how long it will last. When you drift up towards Europe, the challenge of using a zinc silicate is so great. So you need to have a good SA2.5, you need to have a good anchor pattern, you need cleanliness, much more so than you do with an epoxy. So it's what I call a fashion. So whilst things are going well, if you've done a good job with a zinc silicate, it's perfect, it's going to work really well. It drifts off when you have challenges to apply it because it lasts a shorter length of time, because you haven't applied it well. So you go through cycles of 5 years, of 5 years using a zinc, 5 years not using a zinc silicate, but using a zinc epoxy maybe, and then back up again. So it goes in those cycles, because no one's quite satisfied using a zinc epoxy when you know that a zinc silicate will do a better job. And then you go to another country, and they don't use any zinc whatsoever because they know for sure you can't do the work. So they'll end up using a maintenance product that's surface tolerant because they just can't do the job properly. And that's where you see it. It's access to quality applicators, quality preparation that changes it. But at the same time, it reflects on, I said about environment. I quoted a job now for Africa. And in this particular country in Africa, it's the hottest place on Earth, so it's going to be hot here soon. But this place never drops below 38 degrees centigrade. So you can imagine using a zinc there, there's no point. There's no electrolyte. So all you're really trying to do is give the coating there some time for it to be shipped from China all the way over to Africa, and then just cosmetics more than anything else, because corrosion isn't their biggest problem. They have other problems. So it varies, maybe according to country, emotional belief, history, but it also is a geographical effect as well.
Thank you.
In this age of quality assurance, how does the principal ensure quality control and not just have a pile of NCRs at the end of the job?
Ooh, that's a very good question. And I think that the challenge you have there is the willingness for the whole project team to understand the importance of quality in terms of what it's going to do for the future. We see a lot of non-conformances coming in and nothing done about it purely because there's no time. Time constraints are restricting it. And then it's just written off as, okay, we filed it, we understand this could be a problem, but nothing's done. So you're quite right, actually. The answer to your question is that that's a problem that hasn't been fixed. And it hasn't been fixed because in the totality of the project, time is more important than fixing the things that aren't done correctly. Which is also why, I mean, I put up there quality control and inspection to make sure what's done on paper is done in practice. But you're right, the problem is that it'll just be noted it hasn't been done right rather than repaired. So you need tough people. You need extremely tough project people to manage to push through that none of these non-conformances are accepted. And then it's down to individuals. So unfortunately, we can't really get away from individuals' competence, abilities, and strength versus just letting things go. Because it's a lot easier to just let things go and say, okay, we've understood it, never mind, it looks pretty because it's the right color. And that's often how paint is perceived. I don't think it really answers your question, but it reinforces that you have a point.
I think quality assurance is one of the disasters of our time.
It's there for the right reasons. It's not necessarily doing the job it's there for. Yeah, absolutely.
We have one last question before we go on to one thing. Yes.
From Roads and Maritime. As it has already been asked, can you please explain in the quality assurance environment from owner's perspective, if the contract has been given, do you expect the owner to have their own surveillance regime or the quality control completely rest with the supplier?
That's very hard for me to answer. What do I expect? I recommend strongly that a client has their own quality assurance team. Because I mentioned earlier, we are only able to advise. Our contract, for example, as a paint company, is to supply paint. The blaster painters, their contract is to blast to a certain standard and to apply the paint correctly, according to what we advise. At that same time, you have an interaction of two different parties with different interests. So the applicator and blaster's interest is to be done quickly and be finished. The paint supplier wants a good job because you're only remembered how good is that paint the moment you walk away from that job. But because we don't have a contract between the other party that relates to quality, it relates to supply, that's all. So then you have a problem there for quality assurance by the paint supplier. So then it's best to have owner who has the contract for quality, has their own quality assurance team, and they have people actually with that job of following up that procedure. Because if it's not written down, if it's not in the contract, it won't be done. It's hard enough to do the things that are in the contract. So if it's not there, they will be walked away, especially when you do work overseas.
Thank you very much for that. I held the same view, and in fact, just wanted to get it reinforced. That's all. Thanks.
Good.
Thank you very much, Miles, for your talk. Thank you.
Okay.
SCA.
Thanks very much.
So good.
It's a pleasure.